After high school, you heard about, you were in the service, right? For a period of time. And that was what?
Right after I welded, tack welded for 1 year.
Yeah.
Then a group of us got together on a corner, right? Grew up in Jamaica playing Rosendale. And we all decided we were going to enlist. We'd just seen movies like John Wayne movies. And we were all, we wanted to fight for our country. We really did. So we went down that day and we just enrolled. I enrolled in the U.S. Army. And they said other preferences. I said things like, Air Force would be good, but they put me down U.S. Army. So I started, I left from Jamaica plane. I went to Fort Dix, and they put us on a train, a wooden train. And Herb would be pleased with this. I think it was a steam engine at the time. And we kept heading south and south and south to Camcroft, South Carolina.
And when you got out, you used the GI Bill to go to school or not?
Oh, well, after 3 years, and I was still alive, when I came back, I decided to go. I was offered 2 scholarships, even though I had the GI Bill, to both the museum school again and the Mass College of Art, and I decided to go to the Mass College of Art. So I tried to start, but consequently I had to take a year off to just
get over the war.
It was the country was completely foreign to me, having been gone 3 years.
Yeah.
It was strange how people were living here and how they were living there. It was like there were bobby socks around and the music, and after seeing stuff in Europe. So I took a year off, but my whole gang started to drift back in the services also. So we kind of, in those days, hung around the corners, like 8 or 10 of us. We were very civil, but we had good groups. We had sports, and we had enough people to have 2 baseball teams, 2 football teams, 24 people, and we were kind of an organized unit and a threat to the neighborhood, but also in support of the neighborhood because our families lived right there.
Right. Yeah.
So that's, a year later, I went to the Mass College of Art, started the Mass College of Art. There's a pivotal point, and it usually doesn't happen to people, to you or myself, that early in life, but I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an art teacher. This is the first book I did on lettering. It was done up at the State University of New York in Buffalo, and it kind of shows the whole development of how we move from control the alphabet. This is student work. And then how we go into the expressive modes by the end of the semester. So all of this work is student work.
Let me see.
Done at that time.
You know, this is a lot like the work I saw on the doors of Mass Art when I first went over there. We were talking about that day of the color lettering.
So again, this open language, the whole idea of how language forms in the mind and how to transfer that energy in a very creative mode to the page directly. And that affected how I taught calligraphy for all my years later. That you're back to that original state, because in that state you have to invent. They can always work in textual order, and they do in graphic design. They have to. It's required. But this is another kind of the explosive dimension in the mind before it goes through 7 levels of abstraction, and it becomes words, and then in an ordering the culture requires. Another order would be vertical, another cultural order would be vertical, another would be from right to left. We go a certain way that we expect children. It's a cultural expectation, a cultural necessity to write that way, type that way, and read that way. But before that, to get at that earlier state, it's a real creative state. It's exciting. So it always excited me, and I stay with it. All my life.
Well, even I've been to your classes at Mass College of Art, which you taught, where you taught calligraphy for many years, using mainly chalk. And I can see similarities between what you just described with young children and with college-age students, because they're willing to suspend belief. They're willing to do long, at first, probably boring exercises, repeating the same letter hundreds of times on a line sheet.
Called the immersion approach.
Well, until you really nail it. And at the end, I see, this very free-form work, which you'll do.
Well, they can't do the free form until you start with the whole discipline of what the alphabet looks like, and they have to command this chance recursive alphabet, and they can't move on from that. And to get at that, you have to immerse them in the language description itself. They have to do several hundred words. How many hundreds of E's before they can actually control the transcript of E? So I use a dialogue process approach where they have to talk to themselves on a complete page about their concerns.
So they can say anything.
Yeah, but it's all about, it's a Hegelian dialogue of synthesis, antithesis, and synthesis in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's synthesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. So they talk about what they can do and what they can't do, then what they will do, but they have to fill the page.
Right.
The whole page has to be covered. That means, how can you get students to do hundreds and hundreds of words unless they're entrapped in a problem that concerns how they think?
Well, you know, I came to some of your classes, and I had some of these same students myself. Here we're talking about a mass
Yes.
And I could see people who are a little bit bored with letterpress printing, because there's very articulate and, and read letters backwards and stuff like that. But one of the young men in your class, the one that had the large earring, this guy was absolutely transfixed, drawing these letters over, and he was in a hypnotic state.
True.
And they didn't mind. They didn't mind doing them again and again. There was some comfort in it. I think they were quite amazed that they looked as well as they did.
Yes.
And they could be so consistent.
The whole dedication, I look down at a student and say, well, how do you, how's it going? Do you like working with it? They look up and they say, I love it.
Yeah.
And you hundreds of A's, E's, I's, oh, geez. And
who would
so they get immersed in the process.
Yeah, we're talking now 2016 where everyone is working on computers.
Yeah.
And so, you can shop for images, you can shop for a typeface, you can shop for a pictorial. You don't have to make anything. It's like shopping.
Well, the typing is so different that if you put layers and layers of words down in singular lines, and then you ask them to go over that, in different colors.
Your famous overlapping branches.
And then they mix, but that's almost how I think language operates in a room.
Yeah,
Words go over words and go over words. So I put them in the center of all of these words that are mixing and matching in their mind, and also what other people are talking about, ambient sounds around them. And it's a very exciting dimension, closer to reality than it appears. This appears to be extreme. I feel it's closer to reality of what's happening in the mind and the whole process of shaping words. There are 5 levels of abstraction before we form a word, before it gets out. And I think we're close to that process. And there's a lot of people that talk about language being, in the very beginning, muscular in the mind, how it works in the mind. And tracing that process and reinforcing it with the work of these young people that we just saw a moment ago in the words and calligraphy. This is how it all starts with people. And then we constrict it. Then we require a different definition. And now we're saying it has to be digital. This is almost cruel. Required, of course, but at the same time. A different kind of, I feel when you work in the digital world, you have to move appropriately into an aesthetic precision aesthetic, a very different definition of what the aesthetic is, and it's important, it's salient, it's appealing, but what's taken out of it is the muscularity, is almost the passion taken out of it.
But I think, I agree with you, but I think for people who are comfortable working digitally, they can work as creatively as we can. Our generation is used to doing by hand or with a pen.
That's happening.
I mean, the new programs where you can draw and paint and do all this stuff, work 3-dimensional forms which you could never build. It's pretty amazing.
Well, there's also crossover now. I think the younger generation are not making those distinctions that we had to make.
Yeah.
They'll mix all the media that they have to. In fact, it's very current. There are events. There are new forms of people expressing themselves where you bypass existing traditions, and now we have another generation of we'll use what we have to use to express what we want to say, and that's kind of wonderful. That's contemporary art.
So look, I think I have your thesis on the table.
Yeah. That's the doctoral dissertation.
Yeah, well, this is a remarkable book. As I looked through it several times. This was done when, around 1950 or
60, 66,
early 60s.
66, somewhere in there. But I spent a lot of time in Columbia. I went back every summer for several years because what I was trying to do was unusual and unprecedented. This was 1966.
So explain what you were trying to do.
I wanted to do a visual thesis, but it had to fit into the paradigm of what the expectations were for graduate programs in an undereducation master's degree program, a Master of Arts. Actually, the Master of Arts was fine in industrial arts. So I was completely visual, and working with my major advisor, Edward Ziegfeld, we both worked it out that I would do something in the visual communication and graphic design. So it came out to be graphic design and visual communication. We actually named the thesis later.
Right.
But the interesting thing about not go through the whole process, at the very end of it, it took 7 years to do it, and it was only determination on my part that I would go back every summer. But they had me the wonderful privilege of teaching 2 courses.
For pay.
Yeah, for pay. Yeah. And so my credits, I was able to build up credits, and finally came to this thesis, and it was a visual thesis. And the review teams had a problem with it, but I had done every page visually, maybe 100 pages, 30, 40, 50 in the room for the oral examination. And I thought it was self-explanatory, but they asked me to explain it. I wasn't quite sure if into verbal definitions, but years later, so at the very end of it, my major advisor was instrumental in contacting International Textbook and have it published. Mm-hmm. But at the very end of it, years later, after this long travail of 6 or 7 summers at Columbia, over the years raising a family, someone said, "John, we just, in our seminar at Columbia, they just told us yours was the first visual thesis ever done at Columbia University."
Wow.
Approved for a doctorate. And I was in a rage. I was furious that...
Why were you furious? I should think you'd be...
You have no idea how difficult it is to do a doctorate degree when you come out of an art school.
Yeah.
You're working with majors in anthropology,
right.
Journalism, psychology. They're sharp, they're bright. They're doing their theses in those areas. You're sitting next to them, and you don't really know what the professor's talking about.
Yeah, but why were you furious? For instance, I should think that would be a boost. Know that you were able to do a project on the level of theirs in a brand new field.
Well, it was because you were doing it almost like you were being tested all the way, and no one really thought it would be that achievable.
They were all down.
There was no precedent for it.
Yeah.
They did not. These professors, they were wonderful. And they allowed for so much tolerance because we were veterans, and we had to catch up with all the majors we were associated with in those courses. Those are all 500 level courses, except calligraphy, which is 100.
We'll get to that later. By the way, it's very clear to me the way you still work now, long after retirement, with the same elements. You've got to be carving something, you've got to be making something 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
You still do calligraphy, it's getting more and more obscure, but it's because it's based on a very interesting text.
Well, it's into another dimension. It's still calligraphic, but it's now into imagery, where text and image are indissoluble.
Right.
And the text really, quite conservatively, the text prompts the image, and then it becomes indissoluble. It's part of the whole. And I got into poetry.
Yeah.
And the images was fascinating me, like William Carlos Williams. And so the text and image.
Resca, right?
And I thought about graphic design. You're so intensely involved that I always felt on the page that the graphic design and text should be indissoluble. And Mahoney Naj started to say that. And that's the tradition that you enter.
Yeah.
I have students who can do this with their left and right hands.
Yeah.
Well, I can also do it upside down. But there's a point where it no longer interested me, in all fairness. So, but in all of this,
So why did you teach calligraphy for all those years? Well, you're dealing with students, and one of the privileges of those, and this for someone watching this video who says, so what, why do this in college? The greatest privilege a person can have is to be in an environment that's extremely expansive, forgiving, and encourages interaction between disciplines And at the same time, you're teaching young people who in turn teach you a lot. So it's a growth process. People may think if they've seen too many movies that a teacher's the wise person, who either sleeps with the students or, depending on the movie, or is like changing their lives radically. This happens from time to time. But basically, Papanek was a good example. He didn't design very much at all. What happened is that he motivated young people to design all kinds of stuff. They were his roadies.
Seminar group.
No, more than that. He sent them out, and they went willingly to change the world. If you were running a design office, he'd say, "Get back to the work, kid. We got to do." He told industrial designers at their annual meeting they should either start designing for needed people who were underserved because of a fascination with style, or they should quit designing. So they fired him and they kicked him out of the organization and invited him back that fall because he said, "Such a fiery speaker." And in those days, design was all about style. It was not for special needs groups of any sort. That's all changed now for the better. Now, another thing that we did at Purdue, I did at Purdue, was I'd gone to the International Design Conference at Aspen. I think there are a few people here who may have gone to that, I'm not sure. And I loved what happened out there. They had designers and poets and all kinds of people from all over the world. So I came back to Purdue and audaciously proposed that they give me $10,000, this was 1969, to publish a new design magazine. And they said, "Yeah." So here it is. There's some copies here up on the table for you to look at. And this, incidentally, is on this cover, an instance of visual pollution. On this strip mall, which is in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, right at the bottom, off the map here, was a funeral parlor. Excuse me, at the top. Next to Burger King was a funeral parlor, Burger King, and then there was Starlight Theater playing these particular shows. And I nearly wrecked the car pulling it over and saying, "Oh my God, this is a classic example of design pollution."
Well, if you're teaching, and actually you're not performing in art, you're doing something else, you're motivating other people to produce original ideas.
Yeah.
And that's what he did beautifully. He was a conceptualist. But on the other hand, you and I always talk, you and I are always dealing with one essential binding element like welding, and that's words. That none of this, all of that is filled with words. There may be 1,000 words in there, and maybe a few hundred in that. It's all words. So if you took all the screening off, you say, well, what's that about? That's a poem, okay, by Banti.
Yeah,
right?
Jose Marti.
Yeah, and this is probably William Carlos Williams.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a point where I leave the poet and just I'll throw another poet in to deliberately change it to make it more interesting, or to lose it. And so these things grow and you don't really know what's happening, or want to. And then I saw it on the wall in your house. I walked over to it, I didn't know it was mine. That's pretty good. That's pretty good stuff. And now I really like it.
I also wrote an article for Print Magazine about mass art, how it was similar in some good ways to the English education system in the UK with external advisors and portfolio reviews at the end of the semester. In other words, reviews you must pass.
Yes.
And how that was the good part. That hit Print Magazine. It calls masses where it's at. Boston accent. And later on, you were instrumental in this. We formed the first graduate program in design. And we had people in industrial design and in what we want to call graphic design, but a lot of interdisciplinary things.
Yep.
And God bless them, the faculty were against all of those things. Only because they thought the students in those new fields would compete with the students in their undergraduate classes getting jobs in Boston. So,
Well, they were concerned with their own job security as
Well-
well, and until they realized that no one was being displaced.
I don't think it was that as much as they couldn't imagine. None of them had had the experience we had, for one thing.
Sure.
Teaching, they didn't know the national standards. And I think we were helpful in that case. So when I was studying at Southern Illinois University, which we talked about, I happened to be there just as Buckminster Fuller was appointed as a distinguished research professor, his first and only full-time academic appointment of his life.
Amazing. Yeah.
And Bucky Fuller, for those of you who might not be familiar with him, invented the idea of tensegrity, the geodesic dome. It was at Expo 67 in 1967. He did a geodesic automobile. His ideas were based on molecular structures, on physics, and he was designing for the universe. In fact, he wrote a book called Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, which was an absolute bestseller. It was about how, as a planet, we can sustain our resources by imaginative thought. Here comes Bucky, and he shows me that there can be a new passion where you can have design as what you're selling. And I don't mean form and style. I mean design that makes people's lives better. They can learn to do it themselves.
A way of thinking, yeah.
And doing it themselves, that started a spark in me that continued on.
I look across all the projects that I've done, the underlying thread really comes from, I think, something that Harold said, quoting Bucky Fuller, quoting Moholy, you guys, were reinforcing as well. The only projects I'm interested in working on are the projects that I have absolutely no idea how to solve them. Because then you have to learn something. You have to get smarter. Exactly. You have to be creative even to understand it. Because if I hear about it and go, I have no idea what that even is. That's the one I want. If I look at it and say, well, that's easy. I can do that tomorrow.
I think there's another piece to this. Because you could say that about advertising, or you say this about trivial things. It's about what population are you serving.
Right.
And if it's an underserved population, you could say, in this case, for cardiologists who could use this, not this one, but the one that you showed me earlier about the heart, that and how it pumps, they could use that right now and be better cardiologists.
Right. Right. Yeah, the thing that excited me about the cardiology project is that, and sort of summarized by the conversation I had with Dr. Corey Brewer, one of our physiology professors from the medical school. She sent me an email and said, I have these kind of old, stale PowerPoints that I use to explain spinal cord physiology.
Stale.
And yeah, she said, and basically we all do the same thing. We surf around the net and find, things that can explain things in new ways, but there's kind of there's a limit on just how engaging that stuff is. And so she sent me this email and I went to see her and I said, if you're interested in, she said, I want more engaging PowerPoints. And I said, well, if you want better PowerPoints, I can find, I can recommend somebody who could help you with that. If you want,
that's a still image.
Right. And I said, if you want better illustrations, I can recommend somebody for that. I said, but here's my approach. I said, I teach video game design. And video game design has over the years as I've taught that, I've kind of summarized it as 3 or 4 unique things that it brings to the table. Number one is the ability to go in that simulated world in the design editor. You can go from 100,000th of a unit to 100,000 units instantly. And another one is that you can slow down, stop, and reverse or speed up time. And there's not much media that allows you to necessarily do that under the user's control. You also have the ability to make things opaque or transparent independently of one another. And when you put those things together, and basically I explained that to her, and I said, now if you want to take those ideas and come up with a kind of reinvent the way you teach physiology, using the best of our tools and abilities, her knowledge of physiology, which I do not have, my knowledge of these tools and the processes and production and design that she doesn't have, I said, and then we'll come up with something that will give you a whole new way, rethinking how you teach physiology. If you want to do that, then I'm interested. and you've got me. And so basically saw that and her eyes lit up and said, who wouldn't want that? Yeah, absolutely. Let's do this now.
You showed me some of these images earlier.
It's all done in this software. It's all digital sculpting. You start off with a sphere, and you begin pushing and pulling, and yeah, it's a lot of time. Let me show you the heart model. So since we started this project, they now have a medical education course in the medical school, and so we now have students taking the medical education course. And so I'm working with a medical student there, and one of my students is trying to create a functioning heart model where you'll see the heart pumping, and then you'll be able to make various chambers transparent, translucent, and see blood flowing, and slow down time enough to see the exact pieces starting one after another.
Specialist over there.
But now, with so many people working from their own homes or whatever, MIT Media Lab's a good example.
Right.
A lot of people are there in the lab, but most of them are not there.
Right.
They still can communicate on projects, maybe like this, or projects certainly about needs in society, which everyone would agree is for the public good.
Right.
Real needs.
Right.
Not just something to sell people because it looks pretty on the table, right? So that is one of the most heartening things about young people and what they're facing, is what I tell them in every lecture I give, that they're in a really incredible time.
Yeah.
Where although they may be at home with their own music playing, their own computer, they can collaborate with other people in making something absolutely profound happen.
Right.
And because of what they don't know individually, but what they do know and can learn conventionally. Harold Cohen's been mentioned a couple of times, but his approach to design was to make it playful. Remember in his classes?
Yep.
He had us play 20 questions. Here I am, a designer with a portfolio full of awards, and he's making me play 20 questions, which I play with my kids in the garden on vacation. But it's the way he did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the students were immediately engaged. And then he asked us to design something completely way beyond our ability to do, and to go to a locale to do it and imagine it. And that was fun, and that's where the creativity started coming out.
Right.
So it's something about creating and being a completely new to something. Makes you creative. That's what young children do. They make stuff up. And I think that it's sort of hard to have a class do that all the time. But if there isn't an element of play or discovery in it, then people get bored.
Right, and it starts there. I mean, and then it's important, I think, to remember those initial thoughts. Not that, I tell my students, never trust your first idea, but remember your first idea, because it's not going to be the one you're going to go with, but you're going to have learned some things from your, not so much ignorance, so much as naivete at that time.
Design education is not about developing products. It's about solving problems. And you can't solve a problem unless you don't know the whole environment in which the problem exists.
The context?
Yeah. And also what the effects are. I mean, one of the things that happened very clearly to me was that product design became designing products for what? You have so many gadgets, we are, as people once said, I don't know if it was Maholi, maybe it was somebody else, that if you take all the products that are worthless, they take all the energy, metals, plastics, it's a big pile of nothing. It doesn't help anybody. It's a misuse of the universal equipment that we deal with.
Resources.
Yeah, the resources. And I think Bucky said the job of of each individual is to make the world better and to use the world's resources to make life better for all people, something like that. I don't care if they end up calling themselves designers or priests or doctors, because
They're still problem solvers.
in fact, design education is a total education, not broken down.
Not compartmentalized.
Yes, not exactly, not deformed. And I think that, as I think I said it in my book, The Whole is in particular, people look at pieces instead of total systems, so you don't understand anything. So, and we were taught that way. So math is in the math class,
Right.
biology the biology class, etc., etc. And therefore, it's all a menu, and it's not a full dish. Too many selections, and they don't understand how to put it together.
Right. You don't get a meal out of the a la carte.
No, you don't. And so putting it together is what the designing has to do.
Yeah.
And that's what we teach. So how do we do that? One of the things to do is to see. And so my view is I talk about a lot of things when I start off teaching. I might even talk about poetry or music or biology, whatever. I use my initial piece to talk about myself. And that is helpful because instead of trying to talk about other things, by talking about yourself, you're opening myself up.
Yeah.
And it becomes a community. So the classroom is a community. And I am the so-called leader, but I'm also part of the community. What I see also in design education is that if you don't have an ability to sense people, you shouldn't be a teacher. If you just talk and then you leave, you never talk to another student again. What we do as designers, we go around and we have a studio and you sit down with each person and you talk about the work, how you're doing, blah, blah, blah. And then other students critique the other students. It's an environment where the critique is not to be nasty, but to help you understand, to make you better, which is different than being critical. They say criticism.
Right.
But that's what we always did. If you remember when you were a student, I'd go around, we'd see what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. And the students would talk about, when you stood up to talk about your work, you were open to criticism from all your students. So, as I said, more information is not a detriment. It helps you understand things. So, could you have overkill? I don't know. Brian, listen, I'm now almost 92. There's so much stuff in my head now. The question simply is that helping me see or not see? It's been very important to me.
Yeah.
It is who I am. Different. When I finally came to Buffalo, it was my daughter who was then at Pennington, she said, "Dad, you got to go back to education because people are not doing a good job at the university." And so I applied for the job here, and then it was a lunar faculty. They would have people at night. We had part staff and one telephone and 6 extensions on the top of the what's his name building, forgot the name of the building already. Anyway, it was nothing. And so when I came, having known that without power I can't do anything, because when I went to Carbondale, it was with the support of President Light Morris.
Yeah.
If I didn't have it, the others would have destroyed me. I had to have somebody who says no, and would give the money. Without that, I can't do anything. And so we were able to do in Carbondale. We made barracks, we had domes, we did all kinds of wonderful things because I had the blessing of the president. So I came and I had to meet. First of all, the first things I met with the comptroller. I said, I want to see the budget. So I said to him, I couldn't run a candy store with that. I said, the answer is, that's not money, that's no money. I insisted that I meet the people who were running the city. So they had all the bankers and top people, Mr. Knox, the Goodyears, all the powerful, and we went and we had lunch at the Buffalo Club. And I said, I cannot build a school of design without the city, just like medical school can't build it without hospitals and people.
Yeah.
I am not going into the wilderness. I need a city, and I need the support of all of you. And it was Mr. Knox got up and he said, "You will have it," and he did. He was very supportive. We're doing this for the human being. We're not doing it just to sell things at Sears. That's not the issue. If it doesn't make people any better, why do it? I was called upon to redesign the theater, to make a theater district, to help the black community, train leadership, all of those things because I was able to understand what was needed and I helped produce it. So that's an interesting point as to how you have to really understand why people are doing what they're doing. You don't look at the surface, you don't do it topographically, you have to make a functional analysis, and that is very difficult. You have to look at a lot of things, you have to listen to people, you have to put everything down, and then you figure it out. Why not every Monday? Why Monday? Why not Tuesday or Wednesday? All of the questions you would ask as a designer. What, why, when, where, how?